Hello again everyone, it's me, Madam Macabre, and welcome to a new video. As you can all see, this is another face cam video, and I'm probably going to be doing more of these than usual for a little while because I'm playing with my new camera, getting used to it. So yeah, that's why you're seeing more of this. Anyway, I figured this would be a good opportunity to do another Horror Writing 101 episode. And for today's topic, now that we got setting up your universe out of the way, naturally the next thing to talk about is creating your main character. Now obviously this is going to be massively important to your story. Most stories are very character driven, and because of that, if you don't have a well-developed character, the story is just going to struggle the whole way through and people are going to have a hard time attaching to it. I know that, at least in the creepypasta community itself, people put a lot of weight into designing the visual look of their characters, but for the sake of the horror writing element, that's really not all that important. Let me just tell you that whenever I am reading a scary story, if the description of the main character's physical appearance goes beyond a paragraph or two, you lost me. I don't care. What I want to know is what their personality is like. That's where the meat of the story will come from. That's why picking a personality for your main character is so important, and right from the get-go, you should try and nail down what type of person they are. And once you've nailed down that personality, you're gonna wanna stick to it, at least long enough for people to grow in empathy or an attachment to said character. You can change down the line through a character development arc, but when you start out, you have to start out consistent. So for example, do you want your character to be, say, really optimistic, always looking for the silver lining in things, or perhaps they are just a relentless grump who is just pissy to everybody all the time, nothing makes them happy, or maybe they suffer from crippling OCD and it just controls their life and they're an anxious mess, or they are a notorious scaredy cat that will always run away from a challenge and they just want nothing to do with anything new and anything spooky. Got that figured out yet? Okay, so for the sake of this video, let's say we're making our main character just an absolute scaredy cat. They are just a cold-blooded coward. Okay, so then we're gonna wanna make sure everything in the first act, if not the second act, goes ahead and supports the notion that they are indeed a scaredy cat. Their actions, their words, everything has to show that this is indeed their personality type. Especially if you were planning on a major character development arc by the end that completely changes their character. That won't really have any impact unless you really sink it in the beginning that this is the way the character is and that they have always been. So when there's a change, you're just like, oh my gosh, something traumatic happened. So no wishy-washiness. If our character is a coward, they can't randomly volunteer to do the brave thing within the first half of the story, you know? They can get voluntold to do said thing, but it would seem really out of character for them to volunteer to go off and do the brave thing when we are supposed to be believing that they're easily scared or they're shy or anything of that nature. So just try and keep that in mind when you're developing the story and driving it along, that you are trying to keep consistency. That way the audience knows what the character is like. And believe me, it is much easier to get invested in a character if you've got a solid idea of who they are as a person. I mean, it doesn't have to be a good or a positive investment, because I can hate the character. I can think they're an absolute piece of garbage, but I still have those strong emotions towards them, and that is a connection. You can make the readers love a character, pity a character, just despise them. Any of those things are great. What you don't want is a character that has been so poorly developed that the audience just is meh about them and they don't care whether they live or die. Now, another important thing to set up early on is relationships with other characters in the story, because even recently I've read some stories where the main character has a friend and the friend dies, and obviously they're wanting you to feel really upset about it, but I just didn't feel that upset. I couldn't bring myself to care because I was supposed to believe at the time the character died that the main character and this person that died were super close friends, yet up until that point in the story, maybe they got their name mentioned once or twice, or they were just mentioned, oh, this is my friend, but there was nothing to really emotionally tie them together. So if you're gonna put a relationship in the story and you want us to actually care about it, write in instances where we can see that relationship in action. Are they friends? Do they have a moment where they're having, good inside jokes? Are they going out and doing something? Show us with your writing. Don't just expect us to just take the, oh, this is my friend. If you truly want us to care so you can hurt us later and kill them off, show us a scene where they're interacting. Show us, give us something to hold on to. And we don't just have to be mourning the loss of the friend. We can be glad they died. Maybe they were a bad person. Show them doing something that would make the audience not care. Maybe the audience knows something that the main character doesn't, and even though the character's mourning, we're not. Just know that if you are wanting to kill characters off to elicit some sort of emotional response from the audience, you have to make sure that we care about those characters too. You did a good job so far setting up the main character. They have a good personality. We've grown attached. Now you get to do it all over again with the friends. You don't have to go nearly as in depth, but just give us something. That way we can actually feel when they die. And speaking of deaths, are you planning on killing off your main character? If so, that death scene will be the trying true moment to see if you actually did a good enough job setting up that personality and getting people to attach to the character. How do you want the audience to react to your character's death? Do you want the audience to mourn them because they were truly a good person? Did they die sacrificing themselves so someone else could live? Did they just die in a senseless death before they could complete their goals? All those things will just tear somebody up if they care about this character. But there's also merit to making people not necessarily be sad about a character dying. Again, if your main character was a jerk the entire time and they just lived a life of just being an utter monster to everybody, maybe the death scene comes around and the audience will kind of be happy about it. Maybe there's a big twist at the end of the story and the main character was actually the bad guy and you're like, good riddance. However you want the audience to react to your character dying is completely in your hands, and it relies entirely on how you set them up before that establishing moment. And if you really want to get the desired emotional effect and impact on the audience, you really have to make sure you have laid out the groundwork up until that point for it all to come together. And of course, not every main character in a horror story is going to die. Oftentimes they survive. However, this is the point where you get to decide, at what cost do they survive? I mean, sure, there's lots of stories that just end with people writing on a chat board, and I still think about it to this day, and sometimes I get the cold shivers. And yeah, if you had more of a softer, more nuanced horror, where it's not so in-your-face monsters and killers and everything, it's more just like a subtle, real-life horror, that might work. However, if somebody, had an axe-wielding psycho in their house, they're probably not just gonna look back on the situation like, I sometimes get the shivers thinking about it. They're gonna be messed up. What did it cost your character to stay alive? Did they have to do something they hate themselves for to survive? Maybe they had to sacrifice somebody else so they could live. Maybe they had to do the cowardly thing when they were always a good person. Maybe they lived their whole life thinking this is right and that is wrong, and the course of the events turned their world into shades of gray instead of black and white, and now they don't know what to think anymore. Maybe it's completely changed their personality. Sure, every now and then this can also be a good thing. Like, for instance, our scaredy cat character, maybe they overcame the monster or the killer, and ever since that day they are, a little emotionally scarred, but they are now a brave, strong person. That is also an interesting route you can take in development. While there's totally merit to do that because you don't see it nearly as often, you also kind of have to be careful in how you're handling it because, again, this is horror, so we generally don't want too overly happy endings. I mean, unless your story just from beginning to end was just a nightmare storm of just horribly heavy, just awful stuff to the point where like you need to have a happy ending to get through it, so you're just not like, I want to die. Like, yeah, I can totally see a happy ending there, but generally with horror, at least in my opinion, I like it to at least end with a little bit of solemn overtones to it, or leaving you still a little paranoid. It doesn't have to be always just, oh, everybody died, it's horrible, but I like to still end feeling a bit on edge, you know? So again, when you're ending your story, if your character survives, you'll want to think long and hard, what exactly did it cost them to survive? Because that can make some very interesting, just deliciously anxious endings, and there are countless possibilities, so it's worth putting some thought into. But that is really all the major points I had written out for today's video. So if you've covered those bases, you're going to be pretty well set to have a good, solid character that people are gonna like or hate or just in some regard relate to, and you are gonna be one step closer with your established universe, your established main character. Your story is chugging along and it is looking good. We will continue to move on to developing the next big chunks of meat for writing good stories in another future episode, but that is all we have time for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this story and found it useful, and I promise I will be getting back to some regular content like narrations and stuff again in the future. You'll have to forgive me for 2 face cams in a row. I got a new toy and I gotta play with it a little bit. Anyway, if you have any other ideas to contribute to this talk, feel free to leave your own knowledge down in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. And if you are new here and you love spooky stuff, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Anyway, once again, that's all we have time for, so I will catch you all next time. That's all for now. Bye-bye.